Thanks, Chair. It's now running.
Great, thank you, Nick. And good afternoon, everybody. I'd like to welcome you all to this meeting of the Business Board, which we're holding virtually. I'm pleased to welcome members of the press and public who are able to join the virtual meeting online, and a particular welcome to the Deputy Statutory Mayor, Councillor Anna Smith, who is covering for Mayor Nick Johnson during his period of leave. So welcome, Anna. If anyone experiences any technical difficulties during the meeting, please start by just trying to refresh your connection in the first instance. If it becomes apparent we've lost members and aren't for it, it may be necessary to adjourn the meeting. But I'll begin by just calling the names of all members of the Business Board in alphabetical order in order to establish their presence for the record. And I'll start with Vic Annals. Can't actually see Vic with us at the moment, so I'm assuming Vic isn't with us just now. Tina Barsby?
Yes, I'm present.
Thanks, Tina. Belinda Clark?
Yes, I'm present.
Councillor Lewis Herbert is not with us, but Anna is. Mike Hurd?
Yes, I'm here.
And Amir Khalid has sent his apologies. And Councillor Anna Smith?
Yep, present.
Thanks, Anna. Andy Williams?
I'm here.
Andy Neely?
Yeah, here.
And myself, Alex Plant. Can we just check with the Democratic Services Officer to report any other apologies for absence that have been received?
Thanks, Chair. No, just apologies from Emir.
Okay, thank you very much. Okay, so I moves on to declaration of interest, an opportunity for anyone to declare any pecuniary interests or conflicts of interest. Do members have any conflicts to declare? I can see no hands, so I'm assuming not. Thank you, everybody. And we're then moving on to the minutes of the 14th of November meeting, and we're asked to approve those minutes, of which there is a public set and an exempt set. Can I first ask whether any member disagrees with the accuracy of the public minutes? Again, I can see no one indicating, so I'm assuming that everyone is happy. We'll take that as carried. And then can I just check whether there's any, moving on to the exempt minutes of the same meeting, and bear in mind that if there are any points on these minutes, we have to go into confidential session to discuss any issues related to the exempt section. Can I ask whether any member disagrees with the accuracy of the exempt minutes? And again, I can see no one indicating, so we'll also take that as carried. And do officers have any further updates to report on the action log? Domenico or George?
Just unmute myself. Apologies, Chair. Yes, so action log. There are two main actions which are still ongoing, which are which are mainly around working with finance colleagues around exit strategies for our equity investments. Now I know that's been looked into. That won't be done until later on in the month, I hope maybe next month. And then there's the dissemination of economic insight and data. Now we've been having some recent meetings with consultants supporting that process, and we're starting to pull together what is a economic data insight portal together with our skills colleagues around LMI data as well. So over the next few weeks, we should hopefully have a kind of an outline of a brief in terms of what that would be delivering, and then that will be shared with the board for input as well. And that's the main actions ongoing.
Thanks, Domenico. Just on that last one, I'm assuming, but can you just confirm for the record that we're working with colleagues across the constituent local authorities who also have economic data that they can fill in to add into the portal?
We will do, yes.
Brilliant, thank you very much. Thanks, Domenico. Unless there's any other points, I can see no one indicating. We'll move on to item 1.3, which is around the reappointment of our first term private sector members. The Business Programmes Business Board Manager, Domenico, again, is going to present the report here. So, Domenico, over to you.
So yes, so colleagues, members were appointed. I'll just keep the date up. So yes, apologies. So members were appointed back in 2020, January 2020. They were appointed for their first terms as members on the business board. Those members were Nitin Patel, Rebecca Stevens, Al Kingsley, Jason Millard, and Faye Holland. So we recently confirmed with each member if they would like to continue for a second term, as set out within the local assurance framework for the LEP board. 3 members accepted and indicated their intention to continue for a second term. Unfortunately, 2 members have also indicated their intention to resign from the board. Those members are Jason and Faye. So I would like to take this opportunity to thank them both for their input over the last 3 years. And unfortunately, they won't be continuing with the board. Today, the board is asked to accept those resignations, but also to accept and approve the renewal of Nitin, Rebecca, and Al Kingsley for their second terms. Thank you.
Thanks, Domenico. That's all really clear. And let me add my thanks, as you have, to Jason and Faye for all the work they've done over their time in office. And actually, I'm sure, as both of them said in their resignation notes, that they'll continue to support the work of the business board going forward in their roles within the sectors they're active within. So essentially, we note those resignations. The question is around approval. But Andy, I know you've got a comment, so I'll come to you.
Yeah, it was a question really about whether we have or should do exit interviews for members of the board that are leaving, just to get their reflections on what was good, what wasn't so good, what we should do differently, and whether that's something that either officers in CPCA or I guess you, Alex, might pick up with people.
Yeah, it's a good point, Andy. I've had some informal conversations with both Jason and Faye. I hadn't quite turned that into a exit interview in the way you describe it, but partly was around trying to make sure I'd understood their learnings and thoughts before they leave. Do we have a formal process around this? I guess, Domenico, you might be able to answer that.
No, unfortunately we don't, but we could ask both Jason and Faye to speak with, we obviously got the independent review going on for the business board, so we can ask them to speak with Metro consultants to make sure we're capturing that, and anything that can be shared as part of that review. But yes, I think that we could take that as an action to say, listen, we probably need a process in place to do that formally anyway. So I can take that as an action.
Thanks, Domenico. It would seem a sensible thing to do. I mean, yes, we happen to be in a position whereby we're looking at reviewing the business board going forward anyway, but at future points we may not be in such a process, and it's generally good practice to understand good, bad and indifferent from members of a board who are stepping down. I mean, my understanding in both cases is they're not stepping down with sort of any sense of being particularly unhappy. It's just the end of the term, but nonetheless their reflections in the way that Andy was describing would be useful, so let's take that as an action going forward.
Yes.
Thanks, Andy. I'm assuming that there's consensus in support of the recommendation, which is for the second term appointments for Nitin, Rebecca and Al. But if you disagree, let me know now. And I can't see any objections. I didn't expect them to be. So we'll take that recommendation as being carried unanimously. Which I think therefore, Nick, allows us to admit those 3 business board members as they've now been reappointed into the meeting. Is that right, Nick?
That's right, Chair. They'll be with us shortly.
Great, thank you very much.
Thank you, Sean.
So, Nitin, Al, Rebecca, I bring you the happy news that you have been unanimously approved to continue in a second term. So thank you very much for being willing to do that, and for being able to allow us to continue to benefit from your knowledge and wisdom as we go into the year ahead. So yeah, good news to have you back in. That takes us on to item 2.1. which is an item just for noting, but it's around a budget and performance report. And I think, is Bruna with us and going to update us on this, or is someone else going to cover it? I can't remember where we got.
No, I'm here. I'm
You
here.
are
Thanks,
here.
Alex.
Thanks, Bruna.
I'm-
Over to you.
Thank you very much. Thanks, Chair. Thanks, and nice to see you all. Rob, I'm sure that it will be on helping hand for me as I'm the new member of your finance team. So, should the legacy knowledge from Rob will be very welcomed.
And I should say, welcome, Bruna. It's good to have you with us, and yeah, good to have you on the team.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, all. So this paper here shows our performance to the end of October, and it does break down into revenue, expenditure, revenue, capital, and then capital for market down and energy funds. So the first section, as they say in table 1, we can see that the grant income that we should have received this year is £5.4 million. Unfortunately, we haven't received any of it yet, but we are confident that we will have the majority of it in. The only part that we are not expecting in is the one for the LEP co-funding that has been now stopped. The rest of it is, majority of it is delays. The majority of it is in near DF growth service grants and in the ESF growth service grants. Both of them had some delays, especially with the submission of the claims, and partially due to lack of staff that were available to do the activities. Now, though, we are more online with it and we're going forward, and there is less expectation for catching up. In relation to the GABS grants, we're still working on the audit query. This is something we were working from last calendar year. We'll carry on and get it to conclusion as soon as possible. Thereafter, we of course have interacted with the auditors. We just have to streamline and finalize a couple of things. In relation to the business and revenue part, the revenue expenditure, we can see we are planning to spend 5.9 million by the end of the year. We have spent 655. As I said before, the majority of it is GrowthCo. That is £5 million overall of the 5.8. And these are all mostly due to delays on the plans going forward. So we are expecting to catch up on this. Everything in other other programs such as in Insight and Evaluation Program, the Rapid Response Funds, the LGF, the SPF, they were all reallocated to an evaluation and due diligence service that is going to be provided by Metro Dynamics, apologies for the name. And just to say, last thing to say about this, the marketing for promotional service that are within this budget, the £90,000, they're actually not going to be spent because they'll be spent from another budget. In relation to, this is a long report, I'm sorry. In relation to, there is also a table about the energy and market towns. Unfortunately, there will not be an energy committee in time for have comment on it. But if you have any comment or question, we can, of course, follow it up later. Make sure that we can go all the information you require. In relation to capital budget, that is the table 4. You can see that we have a revised budget of 11.4 and a forecast run of 8.2. For the 8.2, we spend £1 million. The majority of some of the forecast has been, of course, postponed to next financial year. This one, their majority are, they are not, we know that the South End Business Park is now being cancelled and it's been postponed, so the fund has been moved back. Also, there is some delays in the Luminal Accelerator project that they didn't get enough people to submit a request, so we are a little bit behind on that. But for what I know, it's going anyway, it's going well. Table 5 show our energy and market towns capital budget. As you can see, we are on the 66 million pounds worth of budget that then is being revised is now being revised to 66 million pounds being for slippage, so move to next financial year. The majority of it are all in market town, and this is because due to COVID delays in the major capital project, and of course the cost of the product, the lack of ability to find resources at the moment, again due to COVID and the other economic situation. Capital budget, capital programs is a more detailed version of what we were saying in the other table. So you can see we have added some additional. You can see that the EAG student space that is not allowed in. Am I looking at the wrong line? Apologies. The GrowWorks additional equity funds, there are more that has been subjected to approval and that you couldn't see in the other table, but of course we will agreed on it in the first place. Last couple of tables at the bottom, you can have your business board summary funding overview. As you can see, overall between recycle capital and recycle revenue, we are expecting to, we had an opening balance this year of 11 million pounds, invested at 10.5, and so we are expecting to get back with an income of 5.6. That means we are expecting to bring to next year 6.3 million, and from that onwards around 2.5 to 3 million pounds every year to 28-29. Of course, as speaking previous meeting, we will need to know and make a good plan to how to invest this going forward. Likewise, it's the same in relation to enterprise zone. That is the last table in the file, which show a healthy cumulative balance going forward this year to the region of just over 600,000 pounds, to then go over 2 million in 25-26. And with this is hopefully a clear and summarized version of your report. Please do ask any question.
Thanks, Bruna, for such a kind of detailed run through. There's lots of material in there. I mean, the recommendation was just to note it, so I'm assuming we can all agree that it is indeed noted. I had just one question before I come to Andy, which is that for the enterprise zone receipts, as the report notes, that runs through to the early 2040s. And whilst I appreciate the difficulties of forecasting income, it would nonetheless be quite useful to have some expectations as we start to run forward into the longer term as to what we think the likely yield from the enterprise zones in terms of income may be, not all the way to the 2040s perhaps, but going through into the 2030s, so there's a forward line of sight. I just wonder, not for now, Bruna, but whether it's something we can think about with the longer term projections, understanding the margin of error that will necessarily be there.
Yes, I'm sure that Domenic and I will come work together on it.
Great, thank you, Bruna. So I've got Dom, did you want to come in on that point specifically before I come to Andy and Al?
Yeah, no, I just wanted to say, Chair, we are working on that. We are working with each lead authority to kind of set out what they're planning. At the moment, there's quite a few of the sites are subject to funding bids that are kind of currently being considered. So once that's all been either confirmed or not confirmed, we've got a better idea of what's coming forward in the pipeline, and we'll update the figures accordingly.
Brilliant, thanks, Dom. That's exactly what I was after. Andy.
So it's a link point to this. I thought it was a really helpful report, and the summary table on page 28 of our packs, table 6.1, it really helpfully lays out the sort of future for the business board in terms of funding. Dom, I wonder if we could add to that some sort of pipeline about bids that are underway, and ideally some estimate of how likely they are to come off. So we know with things like the Shared Prosperity Fund or the Levelling Up Fund, it'd be really helpful, I think, for the board to just get an overall picture which says this is the income you know we know we will have, because it's kind of guaranteed. This is the income that we are bidding for at the moment, because then you get some sense of actually what we're really playing with as a kind of integrated package, and it may just be another row or two on that 6.1 table, which would clearly, we're not guaranteeing some of those because they're bids, but understanding what they are and how they fit together would give us a more rounded picture, I think.
Yep, no, that's noted. I can do that. Thank you.
Great, thanks, Dom. Thanks, Andy. Al, I'll come to you.
Thank you. Just a quick one from me. And yeah, a helpful report and noted. I suppose the one question was just querying was, given we've seen within this report that capacity turbulence on administration can impact on timings of revenue receipts as well as timing of project deliveries. Is there anything that indicates where delay in receipt will have an impact directly on delivery the other way, or where any of those there are risks on whether we will actually receive revenue?
I don't think there is any imminent risk of receiving the revenue in the first place. In relation to the biggest items, please, Rob, if you confirm GovCo, actually most of it will be paying, and then we pay them back anyway. So that is definitely the biggest items in your list. So the delay in revenue shouldn't affect too much in our plan.
Yeah, so to expand on that slightly, enterprise zone receipts, we're in contract with the collection authorities. Those will come in. They might be a bit tardy in sending them through, and we will chase them where we haven't got them. I think actually we've had them now, but didn't at the time this report was based on the actuals of. The Growth Hub grant and LEPCOR funding, as I think I've previously presented to the board, are currently on pause by the Department for Levelling Up. And there's discussion ongoing with them and with our external auditors, EY. And this was due to there's a current work stream within the Combined Authority, the improvement plan, which is addressing the concerns raised by our external auditors earlier in the year. That is most of the way through its programme now, and we are currently expecting responses from our external auditors and continuing to engage with DLUC to confirm with them that they're happy with our continued delivery of that. So we don't think there's a long-term risk on those funding sources for this year. In terms of next year, just to make the board aware, since we're going through the budgeting process at the moment, central government have yet to confirm whether the core funding grants, both the Growth Hub and for the LEP, will continue in future years. They haven't said they won't, but they are guaranteed on a yearly basis rather than a multi-year settlement, and we've yet to have any confirmation either way. ERDF and ESF are both claimed in arrears by the Combined Authority. So I don't know if Bliss and Steve want to give an update respectively on those areas, on how the delivery is going, but there's no direct funding risk. We won't have to pay back.
Just Rob, just on that last point, there is in some circumstances a clawback risk, but that's only for non-delivery, isn't there, in the ERDF, ESF components?
Yes, sorry, that's probably a nuance. Because they're claimed after delivery, we can't be clawed back from, because we wouldn't have the money, because we wouldn't have claimed it. So there's a risk on under delivery and not delivering as much and therefore claiming as much, but we wouldn't receive the money and have to give it back.
Gotcha, thank you. Dom, Fliss, did you want to comment on those other items at all?
Apologies, I've literally just joined, so I don't know what would be helpful for me to comment on, but more than happy to if someone wants to recap. Apologies.
Rob, do you just want to
Yeah. It was just, well, the query was around the ESF and ERDF grant incomes being behind schedule effectively, which I was saying to the board is reflective of the delivery, because we claim in arrears based on delivery, and was just slightly dropping you in it, Fliss, apologies.
No, that's totally fine.
Give an update on those programs.
Yeah, we've just had a project change request accepted by the managing authority. So yeah, quite confident that in terms of the ESF and the skills side that we will meet and spend the grant.
Thanks, Fliss. And Steve?
Yeah, sorry, hi. So on the ERDF side, we're almost at the same position as the ESF, where a project change request has been submitted to the managing authority, and we're just waiting to hear that that's accepted. But that's basically a reprofile and a change to the size and scope of the grants to ensure we deliver it all by the programme deadline.
So Al, does that cover the questions you had? I had a thought though, which is trying to pick up on your point as to whether we, as we go forward, have any means by which we can indicate our levels of confidence in the different forward income streams, because I almost wonder whether sort of RAG status type stuff would be helpful to give an indication of where we think we are on a scale of risk against future incomes. But Al, sorry, I'm speaking for you. Is there anything else you wanted to add?
It's fine. I think where I was looking was on some we have a budget based on what we're expecting in terms of funding recharge. And as has been indicated, potentially during the year that gets refactored to a different amount based on other variables and factors. And then on other aspects, we're waiting on funding where we've seen on historically there potentially is an opportunity where if we've not had capacity, whether it's business providers to deliver, we end up revising that budget that we had available to us. And so I just wanted to identify really, it was the risk nature of, on this report, we don't at the bottom have any risks noted in terms of whether any of these were susceptible or vulnerable to external factors. But I think the team have pretty much covered most of them.
Yeah, that's great. Thanks, Al. That's really helpful. Any other points on this paper, or otherwise, I think we can take it as indeed noted. I'm seeing no other indications, so I think that allows us to move on. And thanks again, as everyone has said, a really clear and useful report. So thank you for that. Lots going on there, and hopefully we'll be in a position whereby some of those uncertainties are clearer as we move into the next period. It takes us on then, I think, to 2.2 and the Strategic Funds Management Review, the January iteration of this, which Steve, you're going to, as Interim Associate Director for Business, introduce for us.
Yeah, hi. Yeah, good afternoon all. This is the usual regular report that provides the board on an update on its strategic funding programmes and progress of delivery. This report reaches to the 9th of December for most of the projects. It covers off the spend performance of various strategic funds in play, the performance and monitoring of some of the various projects, and the other strategic funds updates, so the other projects we have on the go. I won't go through everything in the report. I'll just pick out a few key items and points from the paper. In section 3 under programme spend, the original LGF spend has reached 142.5 million. So from the original 146.7. So we're making slow but good progress to spending all that money out that we were originally awarded. The table at 3.5 notes the spend performance of the the projects awarded from the local growth fund recycle pot by the board, which were awarded last year, tracking at the moment at just over almost 3.3 million out of 12 million that's been awarded to date from that recycle pot. Section 4, the table at 4.1 details the output progress on projects which are currently live. Obviously, it's not the full analysis data for monitoring of all projects. We'll come to that in a moment. But further to that monitoring work, obviously Louisa Simpson in my team has been working with members of the business board, and thanks to Vic and Al actually for their very useful insights and inputs into revising the format of how we want to display and promote the work of the business board, and more theoretically the monitoring that is being achieved, the outputs that are being delivered, and how to show that in dashboard forms. Appended to this report is it's actually the mock-up data for the proposed option that's been worked around with the guys. we are now working to do a version of this with all the current live data, and we will adopt this, unless the board has any other view today, as going forwards to monitor our progress. In terms of the tracking of the monitoring of jobs and apprenticeships, our running tracker total as of 9th of December was 8,791.5 jobs and apprenticeships combined being recorded as being delivered. Jumping to a different project, the South Fens Enterprise Park, which was declined at the Business Board and subsequently ratified by the CA Board. We've written to Fenland District Council, obviously formally requesting now that the project be shut down and that they return the unspent funding. We've given them till the end of this month to produce a final set of accounts for the project and return to us so we can verify, confirm what's left from that project to be returned to us. We've also commenced some evaluation work. Metro Dynamics have started on a next tranche of deep dive evaluation of previously LGF funded projects. And at 4.6 in the report, the list of projects which are being evaluated is shown, and at Appendix 2, the early analysis of those projects is shown, plus a general commentary on general issues and impact of the LGF programme since they did their last evaluation report in 2021. Just to add on evaluation, the Business Growth Service we're commissioning an external contractor to undertake an independent review of the Business Growth Works programme, and that will be happening over the next 3 months. We'll obviously bring you the outcome and the report from that piece of work. And just a bit of commentary following Bruna's update on the funding and finance that's available to the board. There's obviously, as you heard, a projected amount of recycled funding that's there in the budget in the medium term, plus the longer term enterprise zone receipt money. I'd like to propose, and I propose it in the report 5.2, that we're bringing the economic growth strategy implementation plan to the board in March. We'll be working with the board between now and then to input what projects and activity will be delivered through that. But I would like to propose that the strategy for spending the remaining recycled funding and enterprise zone receipts be based or considered against the implementation plan, and that actually it's a separate piece of work we need to do with the board just to make sure projects and how we're going to go about putting together that strategy to call for projects that meet the implementation plan. The rest of the report, so section 6, just basically provides updates on various existing funding streams that we are having delivery or funds that we've bid for, including the mobilisation of the UK SPF and also the 10 million equity gain share fund. I'll stop there and happily take any questions.
Thanks, Steve. I mean, just one point from me. I mean, essentially, again, the report really is to note the programme updates, but there is that point that you raise in 5.2, which we've discussed, and as the business board, we've certainly talked about wanting to make sure that our forward spending aligns with the implementation plan for the economic growth strategy. And in fact, that was an issue that came up in our joint board meeting with CPCA board as well before Christmas. So it seems a sensible thing to do, and we'll have a chance to discuss that properly at the activity update in February before the formal report back into the board in March. But so from my point of view, that seems a very sensible thing to do. But it would be good to get any other comments on that or any other aspects of the report before we move to the recommendation. Andy.
So quick question about the external review, Steve, that you mentioned of GrowthWorks. Have we got a terms of reference for that? And if so, can we circulate it?
We do, yes. I'll send that round afterwards. Gordon has, so the chief exec, has we've identified someone to lead that. So, and Metro Dynamics, or rather, it's not Metro Dynamics, I should say. It's a associate company local to Cambridge that works with Metro Dynamics, are going to provide some technical support in terms of getting under the skin of it as well to support that review.
Okay, great. I'm just interested. I just think it's important. We're all familiar with the terms of reference, so we know what we're commissioning. And then on the data around apprenticeships, do you have a sense of why we're running I mean, when you look across all the numbers, the apprenticeships, the area that we seem to be running lowest on.
Yeah, I think so. I think there's probably a couple of things in there. One would be the failed IMET project, which had quite a contingent of the apprenticeship output, which was meant to have started many years back. So we've lost those years of apprenticeship output. And of course, some of the new projects, so we have awarded in 2020 are only now coming to completion, which have quite a high apprenticeship output. For example, the North Cambridgeshire Training Centre. So the profile on that particular project, for example, it's now open. So it has a cohort this year, but the future years ramp up exponentially. And it's the same with some of the other skills projects that we've funded. That if the builds are only recently finished, so now we are looking at the curve going up in terms of output.
Great, thanks, Steve. Al, I'll come to you.
Yes, thanks, Chair. I think it's really helpful and reassuring with some of this kind of external evaluation that's being undertaken. The local growth fund evaluation, I think, is a really good starter for work that's being undertaken on that. One of my questions on that, though, is obviously we have a number of projects and a small number being evaluated. What is the criteria for those that are and aren't included in that evaluation?
Well, we did our first evaluation report in 2021, if you remember, Al, which was based on all the projects. We evaluated all the projects that have been awarded under the GCGP LEP. So they were far more historic projects, early tranche. These are the first set of projects which the business board awarded to. We could have picked everything, you're quite right, but some projects, as I've just indicated, haven't even commenced. If it's a build, just got the build done, haven't even commenced so we wanted to get projects that were into their delivery, beyond the build, into delivering something. So we basically picked, and you can see, I think there's one project in there, I'll just correct myself, which is the MedTech Accelerator, which is a throwback to GCGP.
Yeah.
But all the others are early tenure business board projects.
So I'm asking really from a point of constructive challenge.
Yeah.
Did we pick the 10 best projects, or did we pick a random sample based on a criteria?
Oh no, we picked, that certainly is random. It's those that were into their delivery post-build. I don't think there are any other projects. Well, there are other projects from 2020 that could have been added, but they're things like the university and similar projects. So yeah, no, these just, they're at the right point. I don't think it's a question of whether they're the best or not.
It's a really good challenge, Al, but the fact that the criteria is essentially a temporal one, how far through is it that warrants it being reviewed, I think helps to guard against the risk that it's cherry picking ones that might come out well, which is the constructive challenge you're making, Al. Yeah. Thanks, Steve. Vic.
Yeah, hi, good afternoon, everyone. So Al, you always put this so well. Steve asked us to feedback on how the target progress is visualized. And you went first, and you did some really good analysis and gave them some suggestions that talked about being able to use the visualization to see where we are with a project. And I then added to it, because of course I can't invent my own things, but I added to a couple of points you made, that we could have colours, a RAG rating, so we can easily see where projects are seriously behind, a little bit behind, or whatever it may be. And Steve, I've got to ask, it looks like the same information has been sent to us and none of those suggested changes from me or our peers who have been taken on. But I must admit, I'm down with COVID, as probably half of you are, and I'm not thinking as clearly as I might be. But that looks exactly like the paperwork we initially commented on, and then the comments that both of us seem to have made don't seem to now be in there, and I thought they were going to be.
Yeah, you're probably right, Vic, because when we concluded closing the paper well before Christmas, in terms of drafting and going through our system, yes, this probably isn't the version that you've subsequently commented to. This was basically sharing with the rest of the board the visualization we've got to. Don't worry, your work, your great work that yourself and Al have done has not been lost, and we'll share by email the update version of this, and we'll be certainly going through it again at the February update board.
Do you want to come back on that, Vic?
Is that all right? Yeah, I mean, Steve, thank you. But the problem I've got is the information as presented isn't necessarily that useful unless each of us has got the time to go back to each project and start analysing the numbers on it. So actually, don't bother sending us this information, because it really doesn't add anything. And in fact, of the first one, the sort of speedometers, and the second one, the bar graphs, they're pretty much simply saying the same thing. And I just, we get too much paperwork to go through, and the visualization was meant to take us a leap forward, but actually this visualization, it just doesn't help that much. And I wonder the value of you presenting it. If you haven't been able to make some changes, or if you disagree with the changes, I wonder, is it worth you presenting it, or perhaps come back to me and Al, and we could have developed it a bit further. Sorry to be, quite sort of hitting the nail hard on the head here, but this doesn't help me unless I've got tons of other data supporting it or historical knowledge of the project.
Yeah, no, thank you. I mean, it's not a static thing. We want to keep trying to develop it. And I do take your point, it's going to work for some people, it isn't going to work for others. And we want to get what's the best useful way for the majority to show progress. So,
but the way forward, I think, is to, as you just said, Steve, is to show where the evolved version is now, which has benefited from the input from Al and Vic, which I can see where it could get to. I haven't seen that version, so I don't know. But something that gives an easier visualization would be really helpful. And in the spirit of the overall work coming out of the reviews that have been going around the Combined Authority as a whole, the more we can get to sensible, meaningful visualizations and away from 500-page papers, we're going to be in a better place as boards generally to be able to comment on these issues meaningfully. So let's come back to it in February, when hopefully we can see the benefit of the further work that's been done.
Yeah, no, agree, happy with that. And of course, reflect that this is trying to replace what was a monster spreadsheet that we were sharing with you before.
Yeah. No, I can see where it can get us to, and it does feel like it's in the right direction. And we'll look at it again in February, I think. Fliss, did you want to come in?
Yeah, I just welcome the opportunity to feed into it as well, and it's something we probably need to do, because in terms of apprenticeships, if we're never going to realise those apprenticeships, then I think we probably need to report on them in different ways. And likewise, if there's different target outputs by timeline, then I also think it'd be helpful to have a timeline as well to see whether or not we're on track or behind. So yeah, I think there's just some extra clarity we could pull in as well.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Fliss. That's really helpful. And Steve, I'm assuming you drawing out 5.2 and me commenting on it, people are generally in agreement. That's a sensible way of progressing. I'm not seeing any dissent. So unless anyone else has got any further comments, so the recommendation for us is just to note the programme update, which I think we've done. Unless I see any dissent, we'll take that as read. And that takes us on to item 3.1, which is around the full business case for the University of Peterborough. Which I'm going to hand over to Rachel and Nathan. I think you're going to take us through this, and obviously it's already benefited from scrutiny through Skills Committee, but I'll hand over to you guys.
Thank you, Alex. So the report today provides you with an update on the outline business case that was presented and approved at the Business Board and the Combined Authority Board in January 2022, so this time last year. I'm just going to cover off the sort of main key changes and provide a bit more explanation in terms of what the future steps will be in terms of the University of Peterborough programme. So the main key changes for the business case for the phase 3 building, which is a second teaching building and living lab for the University of Peterborough, include updates to reflect the proposed location of the regional pool car park. So the last iteration, there are a number of different options, and through some work with Peterborough City Council, their planning department, as well as our design team, we've identified that the regional pool car park, which is adjacent to the existing University House building, is the preferred location for the phase 3 building. And there are also updates to cover the strategic objectives and the purpose of the Living Lab. Included within the full business case are some case study examples of how the Living Lab will be used. The intention is that in addition to it being a teaching building for ARU Peterborough, it will become a community building, very much focused around STEM activities. And open to the public, offering sort of various different sort of teaching opportunities, as well as space for experimental learning. There's also an update of the wider national economic impacts, and we've adjusted the economic model to factor in some of the changes and also uncertainties that we have seen or experiencing in terms of forecasting student numbers. Back in November, you'll recall I came with an update to the business board, setting out the current student numbers, and what we've done is factored in those changes and reflected that within the economic case of the model. We've added in some sensitivity testing, assuming that numbers are 50% below or 50% above the optimum level. So that adjusts the overall economic assessment. We've also extended the period of analysis for which benefits would be considered. So previously, in the outline business case, it was for a shorter period of time, but we've extended that to 15 years, given the nature of the investment within the university, particularly in relation to phase 3, the Living Lab. So the outcome of these changes and the updates, particularly in relation to the economic model, still show that the benefit cost ratio have a very high value for money. Furthermore, the commercial and financial assessments demonstrate that the second teaching building, including the Living Lab, remains affordable and deliverable. I'm also pleased to be able to confirm that actually, since writing this paper, the planning application for the building has been considered and approved at PCC Planning Committee as well. So since our last update to the board in November, we also addressed the ongoing progress measures of the university, and considering what the wider impact would be and how we propose to measure these and tie them into the broader strategic objectives for Peterborough and the combined authority region. And these measures have now been included within section 5 of the FBC. Further work, it does need to be done with the partners to identify an appropriate approach for the ongoing governance, monitoring arrangements of the university. So with these measures now in place and agreed, some of the things that we're considering are, obviously they need to be reported to the ARU Peterborough board, but we now need to align those with how those are then reported back to the combined authority, through the skills committee and up to the combined authority board. And alongside this, we're also proposing to start looking at a programme review and approach of the university programme. And we'll be doing this in consultation with the partners, with the intention of trying to identify investment through the partners, through public funding and any other potential private investors or companies. And this piece of strategic work, it's proposed, will be presented back to the skills committee and the board, business board in the summer, with the intention of bringing together the combined authorities' business and skills strategies alongside to be able to demonstrate what can be achieved through the continued collaboration of the university partners and shareholders as it currently stands at the moment. So that's a very quick summary of the paper. I'm happy to take any questions. Thank you.
Great, thanks, Rachel. And it's a really, really detailed piece of work as well. So congratulations to all those involved in pulling it together.
Alex,
Sorry.
is there an update on the R&D issue that we were facing? Because there's a little bit written there, but I'm not clear what's happening.
So you mean in terms of the phase 2 development?
Yeah.
So phase 2 development is close to practical completion. Since last reporting, we have been working with the university to identify a stronger vision, a strategic vision in terms of the delivery of the building, the delivery of R&D from the building. And we are in the process of engaging with potential tenants. For two of the
Rachel, how is that being done? Because there's nothing out in the public, is there, at the moment, or I haven't seen it, to say you're looking for potential people. How's that happening?
Well, Savills are currently providing the marketing. Well, they have marketed the building, so the building has its own website. Right. It's been marketed through Savills, who are a local estate agent. We've also done marketing through various different websites, focusing, specifically relating to R&D, and through engagement with Opportunity Peterborough. We've also engaged with people outside of Peterborough, the kind of wider sort of R&D sector. So there is work ongoing. If you want me to, I'm happy to provide a summary to the board.
I wouldn't mind, because I think part of the university was important that we had people occupying that and linking. And if we don't get the right mix because we're stuck at the end to find occupants, it may not work as well.
Nitin, just to comment, there's a big sign outside the actual university asking people who are interested in space.
Yeah, but those, I think people you might want not go past the university yet.
I know.
So
we have extended it beyond. You're right. I had forgotten about the sign actually, but we have also extended it beyond just the university. Just the grounds in terms of local press as well. That was one of the other sort of marketing things that we've done, albeit that was done a number of months ago now.
But Rachel, picking up your suggestion, if you could put a quick note round explaining how we're trying to market it, both to make sure we get occupancy in the way that Nitin was talking about, but also that ideally it's the right sort of occupancy that fits with the overall objectives, which we've talked about before. So yeah, that'd be helpful for the board to see.
Okay.
And I think, Rebecca, though, it means everyone should go and walk past it, right? And then you've seen it. That would be good too. But
I walked all around it, and I don't think Rebecca, you put the sign up then.
I don't think Rebecca put it up herself, but we'll see. I'll come to Andy.
Yeah, so more broadly than the Innovation Centre particularly, it'd be really helpful. Well, two suggestions. One, it'd be really helpful to get a general update on how the university's going, student numbers, numbers of applications for next year, etc., because they're into a recruitment cycle now. And the second thing was whether we should actually have a business board meeting on site at the university.
Yes.
And then maybe a chance to have a tour around it, because we talk a lot about it and some of us have visited it, but it would be good to keep in touch with it given it's such an important project.
That's a great idea, Andy. I think, again, this has come up a few times, but it'd be really good, and Anna's nodding as well. I think it would be a really useful thing for us to do. So I don't know, Dom, we could leave it with you to try and actually set that up so that we could take that opportunity to do that. It feels like a really good time to do so. Brilliant. Thanks. Al.
Thanks, Alex. I won't dwell on the marketing bit. That wasn't my main question, although I do agree with Nitin. It hasn't featured on the CPCA social media links or anything. So, and there is an opportunity maybe where we could be promoting it to our core audience on that. The question I wanted to ask, and as many of you know, I'm a big fan and supporter of what we're doing with Peterborough University, was just looking at the report, the benefit cost ratio, and when it's positive, we're showing somewhere between a 2 and a 3.3 ratio, depending on student numbers. What we don't indicate in there, or perhaps I've missed, is just what our target is in terms of normal levels of expectation when we're investing in projects, or are there any other national benchmarks for other similar projects where we can look to see whether that's a good or a bad number? It feels good.
No, it's a good question, and national benchmarks are difficult to define. We had very much gone back to the original outline business case, and they've taken a very cautious approach in relation to the economic modelling. This is not my area of expertise, and I've actually got a colleague, Nathan, will work from Metro Dynamics, or I think he's on this meeting. I haven't seen him, who might be able to explain a little bit further.
Nathan is waving, Rachel, so he'll come.
Oh, okay.
He'll come to your rescue in a minute.
So if I can hand over to perhaps Nathan, he can explain the detail, particularly in relation to kind of where we first started and the approach that we've taken in relation to this update.
Sure thing. Thank you very much, Rachel. Good afternoon, everybody. Al, just really briefly, your specific question around 3.3 as a number, what does that mean? Can we compare it to similar projects? We do have to sort of listed out in the economic case sort of section what the government sort of terminology, what they consider certain numbers to mean, where it's poor if it's less than 1, it's low if it's between 1 and 1.5, medium if it's 1.5 to 2, high from 2 to 4, or very, very high value for money if it's greater than 4. That doesn't tell you anything about what sort of BCR you would typically expect to see for an equivalent project in a different part of the country. Unfortunately, there's not a whole lot we can do about that in the methodology, short of sort of trying to track down other business cases which have been written in the past and see what they've ended up with. That being said, we're pretty confident that in the way that we have sort of done the economic modelling for this project, from the optimal scenario, which is if things go as planned and the university is able to achieve the levels of student numbers for phase 3 that it expects to do, we see that BCR coming back at 3.3. Because we need to apply a lot of caution to these things, and I think the lessons learned from delivering phase 1 of the university program as well told us that we need to be cautious about the sort of numbers that we put into these documents and the sorts of economic modelling that we carry out. We've also taken a look at this based on, if we, let's say we assume that we only achieve half of what the university expected to achieve, that's how we still ended up with this 2.01 number as the kind of 50% of the optimal scenario. If we only get sort of 850 students through the university per year, what does that look like for us? Still seeing that comes out with a high value for money based on those of the government guidelines. Your specific point on, do we know if that's good? We could probably go back and have a look around for that. That information has been historically hard for us to find, but we can sort of see if there are other benchmarks we can compare it to. I guess looking at the project on its own and as it stands as an individual thing, that's where we can have the confidence that from those BCR numbers and from the economic case we have in general, that this is a good thing to do on its own terms.
Thank you, Nathan.
Thanks, Nathan. One observation I had around this, which again, very, very positive and very supportive of what we're trying to do here. But at the very end of the report, section 5.9, which was page 160 of our pack, there's some suggestions around the ongoing wider impact of the university that will be being measured, which partly links back to Andy's question as well from earlier. And what you've got in there, I think, are some useful suggested metrics that would be being tested, some of which do actually then link into wider national positions like the National Student Survey and sort of ref scores and that kind of stuff, which seems sensible to cover. So that would be useful to see as that works through, such that we can track that wider impact, which is the core of the business board's interest in the project. The one thing in there that, and I know it's only indicative, but the one thing that I just paused on is that one of our measures is around the percentage of home undergraduates that we draw into the university, which is a good one. But at the moment, we're only counting that as PE postcodes. And I would have thought that if, for example, a young person from Littleport goes to the university at ARU Peterborough, that is a good outcome, if you like, and it would, to my mind, count as a home undergraduate student from the CPCA region. But with that, if I've remembered my postcodes right, Littleport is a CB postcode, not a PE postcode. We don't mean to exclude Littleport, just to use one example, from that, do we?
No, not at all. I think and it's very sensible suggestion. It's something that we can look at and include. But I think the reason why it was focused around PE postcodes was because of just the group that we were engaging with, which was with PCC, and happy to take back and consider a more wider local approach to what that should look at, and how that should be reviewed.
Yeah, it feels like it should capture at least the CPCA postcodes, I'd have thought. But yeah.
Okay. No, good point.
Vic.
I think you just made a good point, Alex. But the transport from Littleport to Peterborough for the university is not easy, so I don't know how successful we'll be. But that's a separate issue.
Great trade link.
So my question would be: Peterborough now has a university. It's open. Students are coming in. It's a lovely building. I've been to see it. What's the confidence level of Peterborough people now as a result of this? Are we measuring that in any way, shape, or form? Because that's a metric that I think is absolutely critical. The pride in Peterborough, now it's got a university, might actually have lifted slightly, might not have. But I wonder if we're actually even tracking that.
No, we're not. It's an interesting one. It's one that we can perhaps look into as part of the overall metrics of the university. And I'm sure PCC have some kind of data that they can share with us as a use of basing that for future. So yeah, we can pick that up with PCC, no problem.
It's a great point, Vic. The sort of kind of perceptions of Peterborough, both from within and out with Peterborough itself, ought to be being boosted by this. With some means where you can capture it, particularly when you get some of this negative media that's been around recently about Peterborough being worst town to live in and so on, which I don't understand why that's come out that way. But the university must be a boon in that regard. So finding ways in which we can capture that seems a really good thing to do.
Alex, sorry, just to let you know, Peterborough wasn't the worst town anymore. It was the 5th worst town in the country. Huge progress. Right?
Yeah. But should be shooting up the table for all sorts of reasons, including because of the University of Peterborough. Mike.
Just a very quick one, just to remember that obviously ARU in Cambridge are also attracting students from Littleport and that area as well. So you've got that sort of area of transference between the Cambridge site and the Peterborough site. So we had to be wary of that.
Yeah. But I still think, Mike, did you agree though, if a student from Littleport, for example, goes to ARU Peterborough, that should be counted as a good thing?
Oh no, absolutely. And I think it's there is such a high level of local student recruitment from ARU elsewhere as well. So it's a model which can really be taken in and used to create real benefits in Peterborough. So I wasn't trying to take away from that at all.
Great, thanks, Mike. Rebecca.
Just to provide some anecdotal insight, I suppose, and I have absolutely no knowledge about the what it means for Peterborough and the pride, but I think it'd be really good if we could find out. But just as somebody who travels past the site occasionally, there's a real kind of different vibe around that part of town now. You kind of see the young people in their baggy dungarees walking around. They're clearly students. We've never had them before. There's lots of young people with bags, and there is a different feel to that that surrounding bit, just as a sort of passerby, really, which has got to sort of translate somehow through. And I think we're heading back for #1 spot, by the way, this year, because the survey is out this month, I think.
So Rachel, you need a dungaree aspect to your data capture is the main kind of main point to take away from that, I think. Thanks, Rebecca. Any further comments for Rachel or Nathan on the report? Otherwise, I mean, the recommendation again is just for us to note the full business case and the next steps, and we've had some engagement on that. So I think we can take that recommendation as read. And thank you again, and all the best for the next stages of this. One of the most exciting things going on in the CPCA region at the moment. So all power to your elbows. Thank you. Well, thanks very much, guys. That takes on to item 3.2, which is the Skills and Labour Market Insights report, which Fliss, I think you're going to take us through briefly. Again, it's a recommendation for noting, but also for commenting. I think we're trying to evolve this, so I'll hand over to you, Fliss, to take us through. But certainly, as ever, it triggered lots of thoughts in my mind, some of which might dovetail with earlier comments. But Fliss, over to you.
Yeah, thank you, and apologies. I wasn't expecting to present this, but colleagues who were supposed to be presenting it weren't invited to the meeting. So I have asked Nathan very kindly to also join in to help with any technical questions. So this report is something that we've been taking a skills committee report, which has been different to the data and information that's been coming to the business board. And so therefore I propose that we therefore join the data so that all committees would have one set of data which was the same, of which should help inform making decisions going forward. So this paper went to the skills committee this morning, and you are receiving it as a business board this afternoon. So this is I guess a first step in looking at the data that we have available. We'll also be developing a portal as well, so it won't just be a static report, but to be able to make informed decisions, we thought it was useful that all committees have the same information. So the report is broken down into 4 different areas. So we've got an overview of the economy, information about the labour market, also on business conditions and performance, and also skills supply. I'm not going to talk you through any of the data in any detail. However, I'm hoping that you have read the papers, and if you have any questions that either Nathan or I will be able to answer them for you, and if not, we'll certainly take them away to ask the analysts who drafted the paper to come back with it, and we'll come back with a written response.
Great, thanks, Fliss. And yeah, our kind of commitment to you is that we will read the papers, so you can always take that as something that the board members will have done. Now, I've got a few questions and comments, but I'll pause and allow others to come in if they do before I dive in. If anyone's indicating, if not, I will dive in then. So we're trying to be polite. So a few things that struck me, Fliss, that might hopefully offer up as helpful, which will, if we're trying to move to a position whereby we get essentially a single set of data that is useful for all committees, there are some things in here that I think are really useful, but could potentially be both added to and then sometimes presented in another cut.
Yeah,
that I think would help the way we're thinking about this across committees. The first of those is that given the work that was done by the Independent Economic Review and then confirmed in the ongoing work of the Combined Authority, which recognises the sort of 3 functional economic geographies, it would be really helpful to be able to see the data cut across the 3 functional economic geographies as well as by local authority area. So just as a request, as to something that would be really useful to see trends over time within the functional economic geographies, that would be really helpful. The second point I had was around the population statistics, because whilst it's really useful to be able to see the split of population by age across the different local authority areas, what I didn't get from this, and this might be about bringing it together into a single portal, is absolute levels of population and change over time in terms of growth or decline of populations, because that is really vital, I think, to try and understand the overall position and the impact on the labour market. So as I missed it, I couldn't get that core. I know it exists somewhere, but it's not in this report, and you need to my mind, you need to see the things together to make sense of the position. And my final comment, when it really is a bit more of a technical one, is that I'm sort of, and this must be a government definition, I assume, but economically inactive includes students. And I just find that really weird, because surely students are economically active in that they are undertaking learning, which has value and is designed in the end to improve their economic outcomes at the end of that learning. So it feels a really odd one to count as economically inactive, and is completely different to someone who is seeking employment and cannot find it, for example, which is a different sort of economic inactivity. So the thing seems a strange one. That might just be something that is a government definition that I find confusing, and others may enlighten me on. So I'll leave those there. It's worth, Andy, do you want to come in, and then we'll let Nathan and Fliss pick up on any other comments as well, but I'll hand over to you, Andy.
Yeah, sure. So again, a bit like you, Alex, really useful data in here. One of the things that struck me was on page 178, talking about the productivity overall and the GVA per hour worked. And it was really striking that none of our regions have a higher GVA per hour worked in 2020 than the UK average, and I was really surprised by that, because I'd assumed that certainly the Cambridge area and probably South Cambs as well would have had higher GVA than the UK average. And I guess that what that got me asking was, the data is really helpful. It's got some really helpful insights, but the report is very much a report. It throws loads of facts and figures at you. What it really doesn't do is start to say, okay, what are some of the big questions here, and what can we actually do about them? And so we end up getting a descriptive set of statistics rather than a report which says, we've looked at this and here's some recommendations of what the business board should be thinking about doing differently. And I think another turn of the handle on this, where actually we say, okay, so what are we going to do in light of some of this data? And what interventions could be made, and that may link back to bits of the strategy we've got already, but that piece of work I think needs to be done to really make it move beyond just being a really useful set of data into something we can actually act on.
Should we take a next? Does Andy want to come in and then we'll respond? Is that?
Yeah, I think that's right, Fliss. If we take all comments. So Andy, do you want to come in and then we'll wrap up?
I guess I had a similar thought to Andy, really, is statistics by county boundary is not the same as looking at the economics of a particular sector or an area, and it's the insights which do that. What you always hear those arguments from Cambridge Ahead is there are microeconomies and clusters, and they're not really reflecting what the macro data is showing. My own specific example I found quite puzzling was the internal migration figures, which seem to demonstrate that Cambridge and Peterborough had net migration away from the area, which I thought was completely bizarre, because I thought Cambridge was growing quite rapidly. And I don't think we need an answer to that today, but some insights into why some of this data looks a bit strange would be really more powerful than just the data in isolation.
Yeah, and that was my point, Andy, about the population numbers, because I find that very strange. And I mean, interested to get Anna's take as with your leader of the city council hat on. It doesn't feel like there's a depopulation going on in Cambridge. It feels like the demand for housing is going ever up. So I'll bring Anna in a minute. But the other thing on the GVA that Andy raised, I mean, I certainly raise an eyebrow at that, because certainly in some of the Centre for Cities publications looking at those issues, the Cambridge area, which is actually defined usually by actually the city council geography and the Centre for Cities data, has tended to show Cambridge as being one of the highest GVA performers in the country. So to have slipped off this far feels a bit odd. I mean, anyway, it's just a question perhaps around the data. But Anna, I'll bring you in if I may.
Yeah, I mean, I don't have the answers to that question, because I was going to ask a very similar question around, this is a really interesting slide here. And Fliss, I was going to check whether that data is still the case as we move into 2023, because I noticed this finishes off in 2020. I wonder if part of this is around whatever boundary is being chosen for Cambridge, and whether what we're looking at is a lot of people living on the outskirts of Cambridge but not counted as within the city boundary, but are still economically active within the city. But yeah, it's a very interesting statistic. And again, to answer your question, Alex, it's a surprise to me too. So I think this is something we can do a lot of very useful work unpacking, actually. And I would endorse that sense of there's some really fantastic data here, and it will be super to come back to this and unpack some of this and look at some of the questions it raises and what we can do to address it.
Yeah, thanks, Anna. So certainly it's worth kicking the tires on some of these aspects because they seem counterintuitive. Doesn't mean the data is wrong, but we should make sure we understand what we're looking at. And actually, your second point there, Anna, goes to my functional economic geography point, because really, what are we interested in? We're not interested really in the local authority boundary for this purpose. We're interested in the economic geography, which would include, from the point of view of what's happening in the Greater Cambridge economy, all of South Cambs, and indeed parts of East Cambs and parts of Hunts and parts of Fenland as well. Similarly for Peterborough, we're not interested just in the city council boundary, we're interested in the Greater Peterborough geography, and the same for Fen. So that's sort of something that would be really helpful if the data could be presented in that way, as well as at the local authority level, which is also useful to see. Anyone else got any comments before I invite Fliss or Nathan to come back on those points raised? No, okay, over to you guys.
Okay, I'll start, but I will finish quite quickly and hand over to Nathan. So really, really useful feedback. Thank you. Totally agree on having the so what. It's okay having data, but it will definitely be more useful with some analysis. And we do have a washout wrap-up meeting following this meeting and the skills committee as well, to have a look at what the changes we need to have going forward. So please do carry on feeding in your comments as well. In terms of the economically inactive, Alex, unfortunately, that is a government definition, and so therefore that is what we need to work with. And
Yeah.
it's not
I
it's
thought
not
that might be the
negative.
answer. It just seems really odd, but anyway, okay.
So I can answer that one. And it's also useful to be reminded of the sub-economies as well, because in the skills committee, everything is by district or local authority. So we will make sure that we bring those sub-economies back in to have greater use as well. Nathan, everything else, I'm afraid I'm going to have to hand to you, I'm afraid.
Thank you, Fliss. A slight word of apology. I wasn't the sort of author, having worked particularly closely on this report, so a lot of what I'll do, I might have to take back to colleagues to sort of check where everything is coming from. I think a couple of other points I noted down was the slide on productivity overall, and the sort of surprising numbers that we see for South Cambridgeshire and Cambridge in particular relative to the UK. I know I'm fairly confident this is not an error in the data, because I've sort of seen this a number of times. It always strikes me as really strange and counterintuitive to see, particularly for those two districts, comparing lower than the UK average. One thing which I will ask team members to check on is whether that's a measure of people that are living in Cambridge and working there, or possibly people that are living elsewhere and possibly working in the city, whether there's anything sort of slightly strange going on underneath the data about where people are coming from, which might affect how that is being counted. But I have seen that sort of trend before, and it certainly sort of always sticks out in the data as being a surprise to me. The other one on internal migration, a similar thing. I will go back and check with colleagues that this is correct, and it's also sort of not just factually correct, but also sort of conveying the right message as well. And there's nothing sort of further going on here. Were there any further points to cover off, sorry, or any other sort of questions possibly to take on notice?
I think you've probably captured most of them. I think the one thing on that last point is that it would be worth just triangulating with that Centre for Cities data that I mentioned. The latest Cities Outlook report will come out in a couple of weeks, but that usually has a really good digest of across the UK, but it will pick up things like population change, it will pick up things like productivity, employment, business startups, all the usual sort of things. And if we've got some data that is different to what's in there, it'd be good to understand why. So that would be helpful.
Thank you, Alex.
Thanks, Nathan. Bruno, do you want to come in?
I was just wondering if the data include the people that work outside the CPCA area, or based in the CPCA area but living working outside, like commuted to London, for example. That might make a massive difference in the GVA.
Yeah, it could be, and I think that's worth double checking. Was one of the points Nathan was making. So we'll have a look at that.
Thank you.
Great, thanks everybody. So I think we've noted and offered some thoughts around the report and how do we get it to the best it can be. And thank you for your positive responses to that, guys. So I guess that will just be fed in, and we'll come back to it for future reports as the next steps. Great, thank you. I think that just takes us on to the last substantive item is on the forward plan. Dom, did you want to say anything to the forward plan, or let's take it as read?
If there's no comments, we can take this item as read.
I'll just pause in case anyone does have any comments. All felt straightforward there as to what's coming forward in the forward plan, and we've touched on a couple of issues that we'll pick up in our activity report in February, which will be quite important because there's a number of issues coming forward in terms of the implementation plan, the business board review, which we'll take forward in February and then formally into March. So going to have quite a busy period, I think, over the next couple of months to try and land those issues. Vic, yeah, over to you.
Thank you. Just a small point, the 7th of June, nomination of business board representatives for the combined authority board. I'm assuming you're talking about the fact it's the chair and the vice chair, or are we planning to change that? So I thought that was sort of agreed.
I don't think there's any particular plan to change that as the structure.
We reviewed every year, so that's why it's on there.
So it's a formality. I mean, obviously, there's the process we're going to have to go through in terms of replacing me as chair of board, as I'll be leaving in May. But that's separate to that issue anyway. Andy.
So that's a useful segue to what I wanted to raise. We could just get an update, if not at this meeting, then at the next one, about that process, Alex. I know that conversations have started in the combined authority, but I think but we haven't really discussed it as a board. So we could just get a timetable so people are aware of what we're doing at what stage. Clearly, that's not you're not doing that, but Dom, maybe you could take that back to the chief exec and just ask that we could get that next time.
In fact, we could probably usefully have that in the activity update in February, couldn't we?
Yeah.
On that item. So yeah, thanks, Andy. Dom, were you right to pick that up as an action?
Yes, noted. Thank you.
Great. Thank you very much. I think that therefore concludes. Oh, Belinda, sorry.
Sorry, I'm not sure if this is the right time to raise this, but just wanted to offer a reflection that of the people I'm looking at on the screen, I know there's a high degree of COVID infection, and indeed I've had some myself. As a business board and someone who's running a business, this is starting to get a bit of an issue for us. And not wanting to hark back to a previous administration, but there was a kind of COVID response group that was looking at availability of a whole raft of things that affected the businesses that were being affected by this. I just wanted to flag up that this is actually quite a pinch point for businesses, and whether this is something that we should have on our radar as a watching brief or something a bit more sort of active, but just to flag up that if what we're looking at is economic growth and vibrancy, we do have something that is read on the risk register to compromise that.
Yeah, it's a really good point, Belinda, and certainly we're feeling it within Anglia at the moment. And it's particularly for organisations that, I mean, what happens a lot of the time is people who can work remotely, like we all are. I mean, the number of, I know Tina and Vic have got COVID. I had it just before Christmas. Lots of people have been struggling with it. We sort of carry on in a way that you can through working from home. But if you cannot work from home, which is true for a large percentage of the workforce, you hit real crunch really quickly. And that will be true in agriculture, it's true in utilities, it's true in all sorts of sectors. And even in the office-based environment, there's an impact on productivity because people are not well. I mean, you know, the input that you get is going to be diminished when people are working when ill. So I don't know the answer to your question, Belinda, but it seems like a good one to raise. Anna, have you got a comment on this point?
Yeah, just to say, I think it's a very good point and a really important point, because there's starting to be a greater push from public health messaging on this at the moment. And I think it's quite powerful to hear the voice of the business community. So not only is it important so that we can think about how we support our community, but also I think what you're saying is helpful for people to hear, because it reminds people that COVID is still something we have to think about alongside other winter illnesses such as flu, because I know that's also becoming a real pressure. So I just want to say thanks for raising it. And I think it's really important we do keep this on our radar.
So Belinda, do you want to come back? It feels like something we obviously won't resolve it now, but we should take it forward as a forward item. But over to you.
Yeah, I mean, I don't have any particular answers, but I just in terms of the jobs metric, I mean, this is just between us girls, but I'm making another appointment. So we are half a person over the capacity that I need in order to mitigate against what I'm expecting to be illnesses. So while we're rejoicing that, yes, we've created another new job, which economically looks great on paper, actually it's kind of for the wrong reason, because our overall efficiency has gone down. So I just wanted to sort of throw that little hand grenade in there and say that we shouldn't underestimate the potential implications both on the data that we're looking at and also the business efficiency that we're trying to drive as a business board.
Yeah, that's a really good point, Belinda. Mike.
I just wondered, in the previous COVID sort of and pandemic sort of actions, whether there were any sort of reserves that were put aside for this, and whether we need to think about whether there should be some looking at the spend profile in terms of maintaining some reserves to potentially have economic impact.
Yeah, I wasn't around during the previous.
No, none of us are.
I can't really comment, but I guess whatever we did then would be useful to refresh and see whether we want to initiate anything. Steve, you're going to help us on this one.
Well, yeah, we did. The previous administration did obviously convene through all the committees, boards, a sort of recovery group, if you like, to deal with COVID, and we did mobilise a number of different funding streams that were available into divert them, if you like, into supporting this. But obviously, we've got a backdrop at the moment of other pressures on the combined authority finances, notwithstanding the bus and transport stuff that's going on as well. But obviously, as a business board, you could look at that. I mean, we put 6 million into COVID targeted grants from the business board's funding. Some of that came from the GrowthWorks assigned grant funding too. But obviously, we don't have that kind of quantum around current, as we've talked about in the earlier paper. What funding we do have currently available, we need to decide what to do with. Longer term down the track, we do have other income source coming in. Anyway, I'll leave it there because it's a higher decision, and one that the board and probably others in the combined authority need to work out what it wants to do.
Thanks, Steve. Andy.
So, I mean, I think clearly there's a bit of a wave going on at the moment, but two thoughts from me. First of all, I was getting a briefing from the hospital the other day, and actually the message there was that flu, from a health perspective, is more of an issue at the moment than COVID. And that's partly because of reduced immunity to flu and so on. And so the message that we're trying to get out in the university is actually COVID and flu both matter. Make sure you get your vaccinations, protect yourself, etc. So I think there's something around that messaging. On the funding piece, I would be nervous about, I mean, nationally, we went into a kind of emergency situation around COVID last time, and we provided lots of grants for all sorts of things across the UK. There's all the discussion going on now about falsified claims, not in this region particularly, but as a national review. There's the review of what went on with PPE contracting, etc. I would be quite careful about resurrecting specific funding for COVID related stuff at this point, given the national both economic situation, local finances, and all of that conversation that's happening around actually what happened last time with grants. So I think if we're thinking about schemes and interventions, we want to think about, it's back to the data we were talking about before, it's schemes and interventions that we shouldn't tie particularly just to COVID or the kind of remnants of the pandemic. I think there are broader interventions we should be making to help support businesses in the region. Otherwise we'll get into cost of living crisis discussion. Is it more important supporting businesses around cost of living than COVID at the moment? They're all pressures on organisations.
But I think there is something in the understanding what's happening point that Belinda raised at the very beginning, your first intervention, that feels worthy of thinking of, which, as you say, could include the impacts of the combined effect of flu and COVID, what's happening to workforce workforces generally as a result of that ties into labour market tightness, which can be driven by a number of other reasons, or indeed impacts on productivity. That feels like a data question which we should consider because it's relevant. Vic.
We've been talking about this as a chamber representative. All the chambers across the country are talking about what sort of advice can we give to businesses so they can head this off. Not actually wait until they've got the problem, but to work up a package of hints and tips, go back to wearing masks in offices, put up perspex screens again. And it's something it's only just begun, this work, but that's the sort of thing I think we should be considering rather than interventions where we're giving people handouts of some sort. I think educating to prevent the problem escalating. And if only I could have spoken to you a week or two ago, Belinda, I'd have helped keep your staff healthy. But that's the direction I think we should go in rather than paying for specifics.
Yeah. So again, I don't try and resolve it now. It feels like something we should at least come back to, but there's a general sense of not grant giving, but understanding the issue and where it may be going. Mike.
It was just to say it wasn't necessarily pushing to have general grants again, but it just, if you have some reserve, at least you can do something with it, whether it's direct intervention or whether it's indirect.
Yeah, absolutely right. I think that would be the direction we probably went down, but it feels like it's an agenda item for February because we're not going to resolve the issue here, but a good one to not lose sight of, given that it is an increasing effect on businesses and on productivity in the way that Belinda's directly described for you. So thank you. I think that concludes our business. I think we have nothing else left on the agenda other than to say thank you all for your time and input, and that the next full business board meeting will be on Monday the 13th of March, but there'll be materials coming round to the board following up on today and then for the activity update in February. So thank you all very much. Have a nice